It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back as we try to be as grown-up as we can and talk about very grown-up things. Now, this affects all of us, and I think it's worth even those of us who think that we are unconnected from big economic moves like the G20, how that filters down to us. We are zooming out to understand how global economic decisions ripple into our daily lives here in South Africa. And yes, South Africa's kind of been front-page news across the globe, so we can understand where we fit in. What does it mean for us? From interest rates and currency shifts to commodity prices, job markets, many of the economic pressures we face begin at tables far from home, in ivory towers sometimes. But those who sit at those tables and how decisions are made, that's something that I know little about. Bodies like the G20, the IMF, the World Bank shape the rules of trade, of growth, of financial stability across the globe. So let's understand what they do a little better. To help us unpack these global forces is Dr. Elijah Masubulele, Deputy Executive Director of the incredible Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. And it's crazy that you are talking about economy when you have the background that you do, but it's money is the gateway. All of us are affected by it.
You like it, you don't like it, we are affected by it.
Death and taxes, baby, death and taxes. No, thank you so much for taking the line that you do, because I think you underpin a lot of the social development that needs to happen during these moves. Global economic governance. We've got bodies that do that. But how does this work? Is this a law-making body? I don't think so. So put it into perspective for us.
Look, I think first of all, we need to understand what is this global economic governance, number one. So you've got systems, you've got institutions, that make these rules, but why is it important? And I want to take you back to 2008, if you remember, where we had a credit crunch.
I am old enough too,
Yeah, so we had a credit crunch. And what caused that? That was a lapse in governance. Yes. Now, it happened overseas, but it affected now us here, locally. Now, you remember people lost jobs, people lost their homes, and so forth. So the ordinary man might not understand what happened here.
What was that?
But what caused his downfall was what happened overseas. So basically, the global economic governance is important in a sense that, the economy is interconnected. Whatever happens, in other countries will affect what happens here at home.
So we need an oversight body.
Yeah.
But how does this then differ from the International Monetary Fund, from the World Banks, from these bodies that should be keeping this in check, right?
Yeah. So you've got different bodies playing different roles. So let's take, for example, we've got the G20. Now, the G20 is not necessarily a law-making body, but it's a platform or a forum for coordination of policies. And then we've got the World Bank. Now, the World Bank plays a crucial role, and I'm going to explain later, what does the World Bank do. So you've got the World Bank that is focusing on development. And then you've got the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, that now focuses on stability. So they stabilize...
On lending money.
On lending money, And remember, the World Bank lends money as well. It's just the structure and the influence is different from each other. So, and then you've got the G20. Then you've got the AU. Now, the AU plays a critical part here because they are part of the African continent. They are the African Union themselves. Now, they sit on the G20 as an observer so that they can also make sure that the African continent's issues are raised on that platform. And then you've got the World Trade Organization. Now, the World Trade Organization now regulates the trade. So what happens between countries? If there's a dispute in a trade issue, that's where the World Trade Organization comes in. Now, let me take you back again now. Let's look at the World Bank. So the government says, look, we want to create development in a particular area. We've got an issue of unemployment. Now, the World Bank says, oh, great, we love that. We're going to give you 300 million.
Please.
Yeah, not you. But anyway, we're going to give you 300 million rand or dollars, whatever the case is. Then you go and develop a solar project where you can create now employment. Now, the IMF, on the other hand, says, look, you have an issue at this point with exports. You can't pay for your export or import, so therefore we'll give you money. For that, we're going to stabilize your economy so that your rand can be stronger, and then you can be able to move in the economy.
Export.
Yeah.
I love this because it also speaks to an energy of collaboration where we don't need someone telling us what to do because we're doing it in the right way so that it can work for everyone.
Yeah.
finely balanced, I would imagine. Very difficult with so many different agendas being injected into these various areas. Where's our voice in this? Where does South Africa sit in this broader ecosystem? Because it feels like we've got a voice.
Yeah.
It feels like the continent is looking to us for direction. But within this ecosystem, if I can use the broader term, what is that voice? How do we fit in?
Look, and I want you to understand the position that our country occupies here, and within the broader spectrum of the G20, the BRICS. We also have the BRICS. So we were chosen. In fact, we were selected to join the G20. We were invited for the G20. And why were we invited for the G20 in 2008? Because South Africa then had what we called moral leadership. Please, let's not talk about leadership today.
It's not that discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, I get you.
So
yeah.
we had at the time what we call moral leadership, but also we are, the most industrialized country within the African continent, or even then. I mean, many countries are coming up now. And then we were also, or we are, the highest economy in African continent, and we followed by Egypt, we followed by Algeria, and then Nigeria, And then we had structures, infrastructure, was on point at the time. And now we serve as a voice for the African continent. And you will see now that this year our president is the chairman of the G20. So how this works now is that every country that hosts for that particular year, they become the chairperson of the G20. So our voice now, it's amplified, not only for the South African citizens, but for the African continent. Yeah. It becomes the whole gateway. So we become that bridge that now speaks on behalf of the African continent with the global powers in the north.
Let's hope even greater chance for collaboration. You mentioned energy. You mentioned the big moves that are being made. I think where we are starting to see the best impact is in that social development space. When you start applying these big moves within the context of Africa and South Africa, there is so much room to grow. There is so much opportunity for development. This is where it's going down, but we need to know that true north. So we're going to continue talking. Thank you so much, Doc, for being here this morning to explain some very big ideas in very simple ways. We do need to be aware because it does affect us.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to a great economic discussion, obviously in light of the G20 summit that is going to be putting South Africa, I think, front and centre. We are the chair host for this one. We've explored who shapes the rules of the global economy in our first discussion. Now we're going to turn on to how the system affects South African households, our small businesses, the lifeblood. Still with us, Elijah is just blowing my mind, taking the biggest concepts and dressing them down. So thank you so much. Where do we look then from a South African's perspective? I suppose maybe the overarching question is why must we as everyday non-economists be looking at the G20 and those moves, and how should we look at it? What should we be interested in?
Yeah. You see, and this is key. Economics should actually become, a basic subject for all of us. Why? Because economics affect you every day. Now, you use taxis, you pour petrol, you buy food, and so forth. Now, when there's let's say, for example, the central banks of the world now increase interest rates. Now, that will have a ripple effect on our own central bank, that they will have to raise the repo rate. When they raise the repo rate, obviously, the home loans becomes more expensive, credit cards becomes more expensive.
If you're in any sort of debt,
yeah, if you're in any sort of debt, everything now goes up. But now, it's not only that case. Now, let's take, for example, you've got an oil price that goes up, in the USA, for argument's sake. That now has got a ripple effect into what happens in terms of our petrol. Now, your petrol now becomes expensive. When petrol becomes expensive, you go to the store, they have to increase the products. In fact, if you go and look at what's happening to our products now, the products have become smaller. What you used to buy...
And more expensive.
And more expensive, in actual fact. So that is a decision, or that is an impact that happened in the global space, but now it affects the household. So each and every one of us that is consuming certain goods are affected by what happens in our neighbors globally.
And that says therein lies the opportunity as being the host nation to drive our agenda. So we would assume then that buffering for those sorts of financial moves, looking at the trade wars that have been happening over the last year, and how we became so pivotal in that for a moment there, when I would imagine the trade is rather skewed in one particular direction. So what do you think is going to be put on the table? What is our dear president going to be driving at this year's meeting of minds?
Yeah. Look, the president has put three aspects on the table, and he speaks about solidarity, he speaks about equality, he speaks about sustainability. So we need our projects need to be sustainable. And, solidarity in terms of we need to be united. The whole world needs to be united. There's no point that we want to achieve greatness, but we keep fighting.
Because the knock-on effect is too quick now. If someone is not playing by the rules with everyone in mind, you will see that negative effect literally
You will see. Take, for argument's sake, the war between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is the great importer or exporter, rather, of wheat. And that obviously had a ripple effect in terms of the prices of food. So that unity becomes key. Now, and inequality or equality also becomes important in the sense that you cannot build or grow where there's inequality. You cannot have one aspect of the society, owning, the vast majority of...
The gap just gets
the gap just
bigger,
expands.
bigger.
Your Gini effect becomes much, much more bigger. So the president is saying we need to cut the gaps so that we can have everybody participating in the economy. You cannot have only one sector participating, the other sector is living in poverty. So we need to reduce that poverty. How do we do that? We need to bring in jobs and we need to grow. We spoke about the energy sector in the morning. Now, you look, for argument's sake, you spoke about the tariffs earlier on. What is the impact of the 30% tariffs? You're losing jobs in the manufacturing sector, you're losing jobs in the citrus or agricultural sector. How then do we bring those jobs back? So then we need to grow somewhere. And where are we growing? Energy is the way to go. Infrastructure is the way to go. If we don't do that, we're going to find a lot of people now becoming more and more unemployed. The mines are closing down. And how do we make up for that?
And the joy here is, and I say that with a great sense of irony, is while people are making themselves rich, their market is disappearing.
Yes.
So where the money can come from is starting to dry up around us as a result. But then you invest in communities, in small businesses, and suddenly it's an inversion of that value proposition. So what is your hope and your dream in your heart of hearts, as someone who spends a lot of time looking at the human connection to economy? What is your hope for this G20?
Look, it's another issue on the table, and that's an area that's growing. And our president has spoken a lot about that. And what kind of jobs will that bring forth? I think what I want to see as well is that, our people need to spend time understanding where this G20 is going. For one reason, universities are going to produce candidates, but what kind of candidates are we going to produce?
What do they need to look like?
What do they need to look like? I mean, are we preparing them for the current environment, and are we giving them the skills that are going to be relevant in the current climate? Or are we still producing somebody with a degree and they don't know what to do with this degree? So I would want people spending time on that, understanding what kind of products do we need to produce. But also, I think what I want to see is that we need to come up with sustainable projects that are going to create sustainable employment for our people. We can't have people working for a month and they're out of a job.
It's not just a trend.
It's not just a trend.
We need to set up a system.
We need a system that works. Debt relief. I mean, we're spending so much money. I mean, about 77%. We're carrying about 77% of debt to our GDP. That's too high. So we're spending a lot of money servicing debt as opposed to creating projects that are going to be sustainable.
We're just paying
We
interest.
need to reduce
We're
that.
just paying interest. We're
Just
not
paying
injecting
interest.
cash.
We need to
into
cut
new.
that,
Yeah, we want capital, not debt.
Not debt.
And I love you. So I love the fact that you are sitting in your position in the world, because I think South Africans need to understand these principles. But I think balanced with that, they need to understand the reason why the world is so interested, why China is so interested in South Africa. It's not a sense of ownership that they want here. They see the opportunity because of incredible minds like this, because of those gogos that are running ECDs that are offering 8 times the return on investment. There is solidarity in this country, whether you like it or not, and that's what we need to lean into. I love you, sir. Thank you so much for being here. We'll bring you back to try and explain after the G20 to see if anything is sunk in. But I love this notion. How does it affect you at home? How does it filter down into your small business? Of course, 22nd, 23rd of November, it's happening here in South Africa. Our president is the chairperson this year, and we are raising those, I think, very powerful notions for South Africans. It's our time, so have your voice heard. Doc, thank you so much. Enjoy.
Thank you so much.